Hey there, and welcome back to another House of the Dragon video. And today we'll be making our way through episode 6, The Princess and the Queen, which picks up the story after what seems to be a 10-year time skip, where some of our younger characters have been replaced, and this is probably the stage where the story starts to go a little bit too quickly. I mean, characters are just coming and going at this stage of the game. Some of them after hardly any screen time. And then I feel like I'm supposed to care when they get bumped off, which, well, I don't. But regardless, I feel like the show expects me to care about these characters. But it's hard to when I haven't had that time to connect with them, to learn about them. I mean, some of them were hardly more than cameos. But anyway, despite the breakneck pace, I feel like it was also probably necessary, as it ensures that we aren't lingering on what's essentially a prologue, and we can kick off the Civil War by the end of Season 1, and allow Season 2 to be a lot more fleshed out in its events. But anyway, with all that being said, let's jump into the episode. So anyway, we start off the episode with a childbirth. And refreshingly, for the second time this season, I feel like they actually bothered to make the childbirth as traumatic as it probably would be, as opposed to everybody just looking fine with a few hairs out of place and a red face. Instead, Rhaenyra's drenched in sweat, looks like she's in agony, and the noises, my god, the squelching, absolutely horrific. A great scene, and no idea if it's a realistic take, but it seemed like it to my layman's perspective. Also, was that a dummy baby or a legit baby with sauce on its face? Regardless, it looks cute, but I don't know, sometimes it looked a bit uncanny. But regardless, moments after the birth, a maid enters and tells the princess that the queen has ordered the baby brought before her immediately. So pretty much outright telling her that the queen has had this maid standing there waiting for the birth to happen with orders to fetch the baby the moment it is born. Jesus. Anyway, it's a boy, and they bother to show the umbilical cord getting tied off and the afterbirth coming too, which, yeah, it's nice to see the show actually cares about being a little bit more accurate than usual. Many films and shows don't bother with that sort of thing. We then get a look at Laenor, whose older actor seems to have a bit of a better wig than the younger version, and who proves himself completely inept at reading the room almost immediately, asking if the childbirth was terribly painful on child 3, and trying to relate it to a time he got injured in a joust, and then proclaiming how glad he is to be a man and not a woman. Oh, thanks Laenor, what a great support you are. Anyway, this whole scene, it's pretty hardcore. And it firmly tells you the creators no longer want you to support Alicent whatsoever, and fall back onto Rhaenyra's side, showing us how strong both physically and mentally she is, while showing how callous and petty the queen's behaving. Demanding that Laenor help her up the stairs, Rhaenyra charges onwards and past Criston Cole, who seemingly got away with no punishment for beating a man to death, not to mention also beating down Laenor, the prince consort. But I guess the queen vouched for him and the king is very weak, so nothing happened. They arrive in the queen's chambers and she's giving them a dose of the false kindness, asking after Rhaenyra's health, getting her a cushion, before in walks the king, and my god, he looks like shit. Rhaenyra just gave birth, and she looks completely fine in comparison. But him, he's balding badly, but not like a receding hairline, but like Gollum from Lord of the Rings type balding from sickness and stress. He's missing an arm now, he's pale, unsteady. How the hell is he still alive? I'm starting to think they started the terminal illness thing maybe like one episode too soon. Because now, by the time he actually does die, it's gonna feel so ridiculous. Also, he is a good grandpa. So nice and sweet with the baby. And if nothing else, he does love his family. And it's quite funny that he seems to be in complete and utter denial that this kid is actually Laenor's son. I mean, come on. How does he look at his two older grandsons, who look nothing like Laenor, and think, yeah, this makes sense. Viserys has silver hair. Aemma had silver hair. Corlys has silver hair. Rhaenys in this adaptation has silver hair. Rhaenyra, silver hair. Laenor, silver hair. Anyway, he says the kid has his father's nose, everybody smiles awkwardly, and they all prepare to leave so Rhaenyra can go rest, and she has a nice moment with her father and gives him a big old cuddle. And then Alicent sends a zinger at Laenor about trying again until they get one that looks like him, doubling down on that bright banner overhead that reads, "You're not supposed to like this character anymore." And then off they go. And although they never really address Joffrey's death again beyond Laenor springing the name on Rhaenyra for their third son, I did like that he glared at Criston out of the corner of his eye as they walked away, and then again when he looked back at the blood trail that Rhaenyra left behind. We then enter Rhaenyra and Laenor's family chambers, where Harwin Strong, the biological father of her 3 children and the son of the Hand of the King, is just there, chilling with the 2 older ones, not being subtle at all, looking after them until the birth is over. I mean, they could try a bit harder to hide things, surely. This is getting too obvious. But yeah, the whole scene with the kids showing their mum the dragon egg they picked for their brother and showing how the three of them navigate being parents for the children, it is very cute. The only problem about it being that I don't care about Harwin. I just don't. Yes, he's a handsome Chad, we can all agree, but he had cameo parts in the previous episodes. There is not enough to gather that connection whatsoever. So they're doing these massive emotional scenes, him holding his son for the first time, sharing loving looks with Rhaenyra, and it's hard to care too much. It's not a major problem yet, but it will be later. Also, I really like the little things they do in the background in some of these scenes. Lucerys trying to touch the hot egg and having his hand slapped away by Jacaerys, for example. It just adds to the scene. It helps you immerse in the world without drawing the focus away from the main characters and their interactions. Very cute scene indeed, and wouldn't it just be such a shame if something terrible happens soon to tear this family asunder? And speaking of which, we cut over to the Dragon Pit, where Aegon, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Aemond are all getting a lesson. Man, imagine being poor Aemond with no dragon, being forced to endure watching his brother and nephews get to play with theirs. And so here, we meet our latest little friend, Vermax, the dragon of Jacaerys. And as we can see, he's still just a little fella, but he's still dangerous and hell, he's difficult to control for the young prince so far. And they bring out a little goat. Oh, I don't want the goat to die. It looks cute. Can't they feed them people who've committed heinous crimes instead? You know, the ones that you were going to chop the heads off of anyway? Not the sweet little goat. Anyway, we then get a little bit of dragon lore for the audience, where Vermax refuses to obey Jace, and the instructor tells us a couple of things. One, that Aegon has a very strong bond with his dragon Sunfire, so that probably makes him quite dangerous. And two, a dragon will not take orders from anybody except their rider once they're fully bonded. Oh, and three, we notice from this scene that despite their mothers hating each other's guts, the boys seem decently close. Jace even looks back at Aegon for assurance when he asks to be allowed to give Vermax the kill command. And then they double down on this by showing Aegon and his nephews team up to play a prank on Aemond, dressing up a pig in wings to present to him as his dragon, the Pink Dread. And, you know, well, bullying's no good. But it shows that they were all much closer as a family once upon a time, and that it's all going to be torn apart by scheming and politics. Also, felt really bad for Aemond too. It must be hard. I feel like he's going to be the new Alicent. We're positioned to feel really bad for him for an episode or two, and then he becomes a massive douchebag over the course of a time skip, and so we hate him. And anyway, to try and prove a point to himself, he heads into the dragon pit, and is frightened off by one of the dragons there. And it kind of looks like one of Dany's dragons from Game of Thrones, so maybe it's Dreamfire? I think that's the dragon that's supposed to have laid those eggs in lore. Or at least, that's the heavy hint from Fire and Blood. Anyway, Dragon Pit's pretty awesome. It's terrible and it's frightening, but awesome. And then we meet Viserys' younger daughter, Helena, who seems very interested in bugs, and has a giant pet millipede, which is horrifying, and a bunch of other bugs. So yeah, you do you, but it's not for me. And she goes on to explain to her mum how many legs it has, whether it has eyes, if she thinks it can see. And honestly, she's quite an interesting character, and different to how I expected her to be based on the book. No eye contact, doesn't like being touched based on how she shivers when her mum grabs her arm. It feels like they're trying to hint at her being neurodivergent. Plus, she also seems to have the gift of prophecy based on what she says later in the scene. I kind of felt bad for her here as well. She loves her bugs, but her mum seems to merely tolerate her and not really try to properly engage with her. Something's telling me that along the way of her trying to protect her kids, she's completely disconnected. Aemond then gets dragged into the room by a Kingsguard for a scolding, and he tells them that Aegon and the others gave him a pig, and they mocked him, laughed at him, which, yeah, it does make me feel bad for him. He then declares that he'll get a dragon, but not before his sister predicts he'll have to close one eye to get it, which doesn't sound ominous at all. So what does the Queen do next? Well, she runs off to her husband to try and get him to sort out his grandsons, whom she describes as savages, whilst also completely absolving her own son of any involvement whatsoever, even though he is by far the eldest and likely the one who actually instigated things in the first place. She then says that they're lucky their eggs even hatched to begin with, and tells him that they're clearly bastards, and thus Rhaenyra's not fit for the throne. But Viserys brushes her off with an unconvincing anecdote about horse colours, how his black mare birthed a brown foal from a silver stallion. But I do love how unwavering he is here. And honestly, what is the issue? He says they're legitimate. Rhaenyra, his heir, says they're legitimate. She's going to sit the throne, not Laenor. And also Laenor, who is gay and doesn't mind who donated the sperm as long as he's acknowledged as their father, says they're legitimate. Hell, the only people who could possibly complain would be House Velaryon. But they also knew he was gay going into this. And hell, in the trailers, Corlys always says, history remembers names, not blood. I doubt he'll care. It gets them more dragons, and they'll be known as the Velaryon princes for most of their lives until they ascend the throne. And what the fuck's the realm even gonna do about it? Try to rebel and get turned into charcoal? Nah, it's such a non-issue, especially since they still have royal blood. The fact that the king and the crown princess are treating them as legitimate heirs, to me, serves to legitimize them regardless of their bastardy. This isn't a Cersei Robert situation. And then he doubles down and pretty much threatens her and tells her not to speak of it ever again. Kiss on cheek. But anyway, it's a good thing there's always a way out of this predicament. A healthy dose of royal incest through a marriage. But anyway, off Alicent goes to unleash a top-tier rant to Sir Criston about how Rhaenyra's an entitled little shit, and everybody needs to pull their heads out of their asses. And honestly, I think she needs to look in the mirror on that insult, but okay. I very much enjoyed her rant though. The character work and the scripting's great. Love the new actress. But then Sir Incel gets to speak, and even the Queen is giving him the side eye. The dude is so bitter, it's just pathetic. It's been 10 years. She's not a spoiled cunt because she didn't want to marry you, man. Come on. And then the Queen tells him to pull his head out of his ass and act with some decorum, for honour and decency must prevail, as we cut to her eldest son jacking it out the window of his bedroom into the street. And the Queen just walks in whilst he's doing that and just stands there looking at him. Honour and decency indeed. And then she just speaks to him while he's whacking it. Oh God, poor kid. That's one of those memories that will never leave you. He'll be laying in bed at night thinking of this shit forever. Ugh. Anyway, she asks him if it was his idea for the pig. He says no, it's a clear lie. And then he laughs it off as his little brother's a twat anyway, and she yells at him. She tells him that they need to stand together. That Rhaenyra is going to have him killed when she comes into the throne. And honestly, that doesn't even make that much sense to me. If she's going to have him killed one day, surely killing him off before he has a chance to challenge her would make more sense. Because once she's sitting on the throne, I feel like it would be so much harder to even try to usurp her. So killing him off as a child would have been the much more simpler way to go. But there's been no hint of that ever happening. But unfortunately, this paranoia is going to worm its way into his head and turn him against his nephews, which is a shame. It's all so avoidable. And so now it's off to Pentos, where we see what Daemon and his wife Laena, sister of Laenor, have been up to. They do some pretty cool tricks on their dragons, and my god Vhagar, Laena's dragon, is a unit, and I'm really liking the more dinosaur-inspired looks for her as well. Anyway, we then cut into Daemon and Laena's castle, mansion, estate. Don't know what to call it really, but it looks luxurious, where they're hosting a bunch of Pentoshi magisters for a dinner after the exhibition on their dragon. And it seems like in the decade that's passed, they've been on one long grand tour of Essos, and Pentos is simply the latest stop in their voyage. The magister, or hell, maybe it's even the Prince of Pentos. He blows smoke up their asses, he toasts Aegon the Conqueror, and then he offers them the manse forever, because they simply seem to be borrowing it. So he wants to give it to them as a permanent gift, along with its associated incomes, in exchange for Daemon and Laena, and Baela on her dragon Moondancer, protecting Pentos from the rising threat of the Triarchy, who have recently allied themselves with Corran Martell of Dawn. And honestly, it's not a bad offer all things considered, but it's clear that Laena doesn't want to accept it, whilst Daemon, he seems to want something to call his own and thus considers the offer. But of course they table the discussion for the time being. So yeah, guess there's trouble in paradise, eh? We then cut to later that evening, where Daemon is teaching Baela High Valyrian, and in comes his wife, and she tells him that she doesn't want this life and wants to go back to Westeros, but, well, Daemon's literally the master of deflection, and so he completely and utterly brushes her off and goes back to his reading. And so then it's back to King's Landing for some sword training with Sir Criston. Damn. It could have been anybody else, but of course this douchebag is going to be allowed to bully children. He gives extreme side-eye to Lucerys, who's what? 6, 7, and also ignores Jace for the most part, whilst giving Aegon and Aemond one-on-one sessions and close-up training. Other things I did notice was that despite his warning by his mother, at first Aegon's actually quite nice to little Luke, patting him on the back and treating him like a little brother. And of course, Aemond is less kind to Jace, but honestly he's still probably quite salty about being bullied. Criston then defeats Aemond and Aegon 2 versus 1, and all the while, the King and the Hand are up on the balcony watching the proceedings, with the King especially being quite excited about the bond these boys will forge during their training. Of course, anyone who's in the know knows this is clearly wishful thinking, but okay. And honestly, it really just is a representation of his reign in this scene. Him sitting above everybody as king, but unable to be a part of it at all. He can't get involved because he's too sickly, too weak, and thus eventually the relationship between his family members starts to disintegrate and he can't do anything about it. He's old and weak, too sick to be of use and lacking any real conviction. He just wants peace. And this is pretty much mirrored by his reign. Everything's starting to fracture because of his inability to intervene, both due to his illness, but also his lack of will. And it's quite sad. But anyway, Sir Incel continues to ignore Rhaenyra's kids, prompting Harwin, their biological dad, to step in to complain, which, yeah, I get it, he's a good man for doing that, but at the same time, his dad, Lord Strong, is right. It will just make people talk, which is the last thing those kids need. Anyway, this prompts Sir Criston to manhandle Jace and tell Aegon to fight him, despite the difference in their size and strength, which results in Jace getting pummeled into the dirt in their first fight, and prompting a moment where Viserys really should have stepped in. I mean, he's the king for God's sake, and yet he's watching one of his servants mistreat his grandson for no reason, which simply serves to sow discord between the family. This was honestly a bit hard to watch. The poor kid gets obliterated the first time, although he does put up a good fight in the second fight. And then he gets knocked down, and Sir Criston encourages Aegon to not let him get back up and just keep hitting him. Yells at him to keep him down, and the king still does nothing. So Papa Strong intervenes like the handsome Chad that he is and knocks Aegon away. And Sir Criston then baits him by implying that he's the father of Rhaenyra's children. And it is true, but still also treason to say something like that. How does the king do nothing about any of this? And then, of course, Harwin loses his shit and beats the shit out of Criston, which is deeply cathartic, but it's a major win politically for Criston, as it exposes the scandal even further. It does suck that this dude gets punished for being a good father, but yeah, that's how it is. We then cut to Rhaenyra discovering what went down, and her sneaking through the secret passageways from her bedroom to eavesdrop on Lord Strong and Harwin. And Lord Lionel remains a complete Chad, not even bothering to defend his son, and screaming at him for being a complete and utter imbecile and getting the princess pregnant, not once, not twice, but thrice. And how it's only because the king is deep in denial that he hasn't been executed or exiled at this stage of the game. And honestly, I think the king does know. But what's he gonna do now? He loves the children a lot. He doesn't want them disinherited, or executed, or sent to the wall, or anything like that. So he plays the fool, and he tries to placate everybody, which obviously doesn't work. But anyway, briefly back to Lord Strong, it's nice to see a character who doesn't care much for his own position, but more for the stability of the realm itself. But that's the end for Rhaenyra, who heads back to her rooms again, where we get another look at the realities of the aftermath of giving birth, as Rhaenyra is given a soaking rag to soothe her sore breasts, because obviously, she's not going to be breastfeeding. Royalty doesn't do that sort of thing generally, at least not in this sort of era. And I really enjoyed these little moments. They added to the overall experience and helped in getting immersed in the world. But of course, this moment's interrupted by the arrival of Laenor with his latest boyfriend, making a spectacle out of themselves before the entire court, as they make their way through the Red Keep, loudly singing, which, yeah, not a great look that he's day drinking and completely disengaged from his family, and even his boyfriend was looking a bit weirded out by everything. Just plain awkward. Especially when he starts talking about how the milk swells the breasts after birth. Come on, dude, how can you be that dumb? Anyway, we learn from him that wars return to the Stepstones, as we heard in the Pentos storyline, and that he wants to go down there and fight. So much for caring about his family. The dude is not showing me why I should like him very much at all. He seems to love and dote on his kids when he's standing right there, but then he wants to go off and have adventures after a decade of debauching himself at court because he's bored? Come on, man. Don't be a Bobby B. He's so checked out that here, in private, he acts like he doesn't even really care all that much about the kids he's raised as his sons, which is just, I mean, so much for me liking this guy. Shit, they could get in serious trouble from all this and he just scoffs and laughs and complains, whilst also indulging himself for a decade with the best of everything, horses, wine, men, and then he has the audacity to cry about it? Anyway, she then hits him with a royal command to stay in the city, which shuts him up. Although in my eyes, this marriage draws ever closer to failure. And then it's back to Pentos, where one of the sisters, Rhaena I think, is sitting by the fire trying to get her egg to hatch. But bless her, it's not happening for her. And so her mum tells her that maybe it's time to let it go. After all, if it hasn't hatched now, then it's very likely that it never will. And that it's a more prudent course of action for her to try and claim a dragon like Laena did, like Daemon did. And thus, she should talk to her father about that. And here we learn that, whoopsie, Daemon is not the greatest father in the world, as he ignores Rhaena, likely because he believes that since she doesn't have a dragon, she doesn't fit in with his Targaryen supremacist view. And thus, in his mind, she's less than Baela, whom we saw him privately tutoring in Valyrian, and felt really bad for this kid. doesn't feel like she belongs anywhere and that she's the least of her entire family simply because she can't ride a dragon yet. And then she opens up about this to her mum and is told, "Oh, your dad's trying his best," implying that it's hard for him to care about her, but he's trying. Yikes. But at least her mum then does go and bother to talk to him, but it's still mostly about their marriage, not the kids. And this whole scene, it was just sad. She basically begs him to consider going home to Westeros as she misses home, and she can tell that he does too, even though he keeps trying his utmost to deny it. And she even acknowledges that she realizes that she's not the wife that he wanted, which, yeah, that's a pretty shit realization to have, all things considered. And so she keeps trying to convince him that this life isn't for him, that he's more than just a ghost haunting the castle, reliving the past in the library. And yeah, he will be more, but sadly, it doesn't feel like she's going to be there to see it. She's one of these characters with the death flag flapping in the wind. But moving on, we then get to see a small council meeting and see just how far it's fallen, as they get nothing done and are just completely and utterly checked out of doing anything to benefit the kingdoms whatsoever. Every time one of them tries to make a decision, they're contradicted by the other. For one, the Queen is right that a border dispute between the Blackwoods and the Brackens should be handled by the Tullys, who rule the Riverlands. Otherwise, what is the point of having an overlord when the Crown's just going to rule directly? But then Rhaenyra wants to send a Crown representative to go and investigate the borders by talking to the peasants who have a vested interest because they're either sworn to the Blackwoods or the Brackens. It's like, sure, okay, but why can't the Tullys do that? They're far closer and they have the knowledge. This feels like a waste of the Crown's time and money. And then we learn about the Stepstones, which Daemon ceded to the throne years before. Somehow, instead of building a fleet and castles and, I don't know, a brand new city there, which would have been propped up by having a blockade that demands tribute from all trade passing the Stepstones, which would be extremely lucrative. I mean, take a look at a map and you'll understand why this is a choke point that matters. But after beating the Triarchy into the dirt, the Iron Throne just let it be. And then they complain that they can't afford to go to war for it again, which is an absolute fail. What a blunder! Especially since the Iron Throne never even fought in the war at all. It was the Velaryons and Daemon. Jesus. And so the princess and the queen butt heads and nothing's achieved at all, and the queen pretty much orders the king around. And then Rhaenyra tries to give an olive branch, marry Jacaerys to Helaena. And who would have thought that I'd be hoping for the incestuous pathway? But here we are. It's the right decision. And she even offers to give Aemond a dragon egg before her breasts start leaking through her dress. Which, you know, that's pretty terrible timing as it derails the proposal quite a bit, and it's just a bit unfortunate. And as the king and queen head back to their chambers, the queen says no, and the king doesn't put his foot down because he's too weak, and thus it all but guarantees that the family's going to continue to be enemies for this generation. I mean, sure, from his perspective, a war on the scale of the Dance of Dragons feels like it would be unlikely. Much like people did not expect World War I to be so big. But regardless, there was going to be violence. What a fool! Moving on again, we have Lord Strong then enter the king's chambers and try to resign because, you know, his son has had 3 children with the princess, which has shamed their house and the royal house, at least in his eyes. But since he won't up to it to try and protect his son's life, the king doesn't let him resign. But regardless, he allows him a leave of absence to take Harwin back to Harrenhal to learn to rule the lands and castle and take him away from all the eyes at court. And I find it quite amusing that when it comes to his own family tearing itself apart, the king is so weak-willed. But Lord Strong, of all people, tries to quit and go home. Oh, he won't have it. He's putting his foot down. Won't hear a word about it. He loves him too much. And so the queen storms off to have dinner with Larys Strong, and imagine thinking this dude's good news. The guy is so obviously slimy and untrustworthy. But then again, I doubt she has many friends at all, so anyway. She tells Larys that his father and brother are going to go back to Harrenhal before his father returns to court, while she laments that she wants her father to return to court as well, because she wants somebody who's on her side, who'll listen to her and side with her no matter what. And so this clearly gives Larys an idea. And so he's off to the prison to hire some goons and cut out their tongues, and likely assassinate his family. Jesus, this is pretty awful. Guess we have to hate this guy now. Also, why must they show me a close-up of the tongues getting sliced? Ugh. We're then back to Pentos where Laen is giving birth, and it is not going well at all. She's reached the stage that Amma did. She needs a C-section to save the child, but she will die. And Daemon, reaching the same test as his brother did, actually refuses to kill her, which was nice. But she, of course, had already fled the room whilst he was talking to the physician, likely fearing that he was going to agree and give her an undignified death. And so we see she's run outside to Vhagar, and that she wants to die a dragon rider's death by fire. and so she orders the old coot to burn her alive. A couple of times, but she keeps refusing until it gets to the point that Laena is literally begging her to do it. This whole scene was just sad, but like I said earlier, we hardly knew her, so it was harder for me to care that much. So yeah, sad, but not that sad. And so she's incinerated just as Daemon comes out to check on her. Good luck explaining that one to the kids. Whew. Saddest part is that now Rhaenyra's lost the one parent who knew how to engage with her, which is a shame. We then have Harwin farewelling his secret bastards and Rhaenyra, and yeah, once again it's sad, but not too sad, we hardly know him. It's more sad that these kids have lost their most caring and loving paternal figure, as their father, Laenor, is absentee, and Grandad is weak as shit. Oh, and Kristen Cole bullies them in the yard. Just sad, really. Especially since he keeps on talking about how they're going to meet again. Sure, mate, sure. And then there's Jace running out and watching him leave like it's an after-school special and he's watching his dad pull out of the driveway. Yeah, that was sad too. Especially since in that moment he realised who he actually was. And his mum doesn't even try to deny it for him. Leaves him to his own little crisis about being a bastard before going to fetch her husband and his boyfriend, and then off they go to Dragonstone as the marriage proposal was rejected and she's realised that there's no winning here. She needs to retreat and build up her own court on Dragonstone instead. And of course, then Lord Strong and Sir Harwin get roasted alive in their castle, which, yeah, rest in peace Harwin. But I'm mostly gutted about Lord Strong, the hand who actually gave a shit about helping the king. And it's then followed up with Larys giving a serial killer speech about how children are a weakness that simply undermined you, as we see Rhaenyra and co arrive at Dragonstone, Viserys cry about Aemma because his life sucks and his new queen sucks and now his daughter's left him. We see the aftermath of Harrenhal, and Rhaena and Baelor mourning their mother, whose corpse is still charred in the yard. Damn it, move it somewhere out of sight for these poor kids. Whilst their dad, who is probably in shock, realistically, and doesn't know what to do, just leaves them to it. And then the Queen realises her best little pal, her friendly little crippled friend, is actually a deranged kinslayer who now has power over her, and could probably bump her off if he wanted to. That now she can't trust him. Because if he could so willingly murder his own family, she is not safe. And yeah, no shit, how could you have been friends for a decade with this man? And only now you're starting to realise that something's not right there. Yikes. Are you truly that self-absorbed you didn't notice? But yeah, that's the end of the episode. Really good as well. It was very wholesome at times, sad at others. And then we finished it off being creepy and deranged, as it should be. And so with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.